Hey folks, real quick I want to show you more in depth what you can do with the character and the paragraph panels. Now whenever you're formatting text you'll use a combination of panels. You can use character, paragraph, swatches, color, text wrap, stroke, a lot of different things. But primarily when you're formatting text, you're going to be using a combination of character and paragraph. So I just have some dummy text here just to play around with. And you might have a different font as your primary font. I think it's Myriad or Minion perhaps, but either way it doesn't really matter. I just want to show you a few things. So this is the character panel, and if yours looks different, it might look like this, and if that's the case, click on this little upper right menu and click Show Options so we can get all of our different options. And I just want to go through some typographic vocabulary so you can understand what we're talking about as we move forward. So this first selection is our font menu. Okay, or our typeface menu, and we have fonts that we can, you'll see something that says add fonts from Typekit. I'm going to talk about that next week, and then you'll see a long list of fonts. I probably have more than you. I collect fonts, and then underneath that, based on the font that you have selected, if it has multiple weights, you'll have the different weights. For example, this particular font, Avenir, has light oblique, oblique is italics, book, Roman, book oblique, and several different weights and postures. Okay. After that, you have a font size, okay, where you can adjust the font size. Next to that is the leading. Leading is space between lines of text. For example, if I click over here and select this paragraph, and I take this up, it will make the lines further apart from each other. Now there are ideal, kind of what people assume to be the ideal amount of space in between lines of text, and that goes along with perception and how we read and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into when we start talking about design basics and design fundamentals. But in general, you want your leading to be somewhere between 2 and 6 or 8 points above your font size. So I think by default it's gives you 14.4 point leading if you have 12 point font, and it'll change based on whenever you select your font size. All right, moving on. These next two, it took me a while to realize the difference between them, but we have tracking and we have kerning. I think the one on the right is tracking and the one on the left is kerning. These are the spaces in between individual characters. Okay, so for example, if I want this headline to be spread out a little bit bigger, like for instance, if I made this bigger, and now I use the arrow keys a lot. You can also highlight and use the up and down arrow keys on your keyboard, or you can type in a number if you know specifically and hit enter. But let's say I wanted this to be to have some more space between the characters. I could select the whole headline and then click. It goes in increments of 10. Increase the tracking. Or if I wanted it to be a little bit tighter, I could decrease the tracking to negative numbers. Okay, so that's what you do when you have a whole line of text or a whole word, whatever, selected. The kerning is actually the space between a pair of characters. So if I just wanted to adjust the space between this N and E, and you're like, why would you ever want to do that? But as you get more into typography, you'll notice little differences in spaces, which doesn't really matter in paragraphs. But for example, if you have a big headline, I notice that there's a little bit more space between the N and the E than there is between the I and the N. So if I wanted to adjust that, I would put my cursor in between those, and I would adjust that, and it's going to only adjust the space between those two characters, okay, as opposed to an entire word or paragraph or line, whatever. So moving on, these next two are vertical scale and horizontal scale. Now, as I mentioned in my previous video, you generally don't want these to be different. For example, you don't want the vertical scale to be 50% and the horizontal scale to be 100, because your text is going to look stretched. It's going to look weird. All right, and so you generally want to keep these the same. Okay, I don't mess with these at all, really. Below this was called a baseline shift. And what that does is it moves a character or whatever you have selected up or down above the baseline, which is where the text sits. So if I were to click this up, you'd see it raises the E up. It also lowers it if I take it into negative numbers. Okay. There are cases when you will want to do that, and I'll explain that as they present themselves. Then this last option is false italic, and this is another one that I don't use because it kind of makes your font look a little funky. Using fake bold and fake adjusting the horizontal and vertical scale and fake italic just really doesn't look very good. But in a pinch, you can do it. It'll make your text kind of skew to the side. Now, obviously, it starts to look a little weird when you do it too much. But if you're subtle with it, sometimes you can get away with it. Make it look like an italic if you don't have an italic in your font. Okay. In this case, I do. With this particular typeface, I can just make it oblique, and I won't have to worry about it. All right. Language, you don't want to mess with that. All right. So you also have in this menu several different options. Open type is something that some fonts have where you can add special glyphs or special characters, that kind of stuff. All caps, you can make your text all caps and then uncheck it. Lots of different things. Superscript, subscript. You can underline your text and then do a strike through, and then you can also have both underline and strike through have options. If you click on that, it'll open up a different panel where you can make sure you check preview if you want to play around with this. Check preview so you can see it. You can adjust how thick the headline is, or the underline is, how far away from the text it is. You can change the color. You can even, if you make it a dotted line, you can adjust the gap color. So you can do some pretty awful things with these settings. So be subtle with your text. Anyway, the next video I'll show you real quick about what you can do with the paragraph panel. But now notice that a lot of these things, pretty much all of them, you can do in the character panel. You can also do up here in the control panel whenever you have text selected. Okay, the control panel sort of collects a bunch of different things based on whatever it thinks you're doing. So if I have the text frame selected by clicking on the selection tool, then I have things relating to the container. If I have the text selected itself, then it has options related to formatting the text.